All right, Zach here. I'm here with the L0rdGwyn himself, Keenan. For those of you who do not know Keenan, the guy known as L0rdGwyn on HeadFi, two main threads, the DIY audio thread and then the Aegis thread. Aegis is what we're here mostly to talk about today for those who didn't already know. So yeah, here we're on the DIY thread, and then the commercial version of the Aegis is what we're here to talk about, which I have right here. I guess, I don't know, the first thing I always want to find out about is just like, I mean, I know you have a career in the medical field, like what happened? Like what corrupted your brain into wanting to make tube amps? I think there's a bottlehead behind it, or I'll let you.
Yeah, there is for sure. So I don't know, like as soon as I got into like HeadFi, I kind of was already doing DIY things. I was like doing like aftermarket, like Grado headphones I was making, I was braiding cables and stuff like that. And then I sort of like, can't even remember exactly how it happened, but I got like the tube itch. And then I think the first tube amp I had was maybe a shit Lear. But I got my hands on a bottlehead crack. I was like, no, this is what I need to do. I need to build stuff. And then when I heard the crack, I was like, whoa, this is different. And that sort of set things off. Then I found the 2359 lead thread on HeadFi, which is, I was like, these are my people. This is where all the tube weirdos hang out. Got a Glenn OTL. I was doing some like modifications in that and talking to Glenn a lot about amp design. And then he was I was like kind of planning an amplifier with him. I wanted a set amplifier, and Glenn was going to build it, but I had already done so much planning for it that I was like, why don't I just build it? So then I made the thread, the DIY thread, and that's kind of where that begins. Because like if you look at the first page of that thread, like I really have no idea what I'm doing.
2019, December.
That's right. Just before the pandemic. And so I got really into tube design, and then, working in the medical field and in critical care during the pandemic, it was sort of like my thing that like kept my mind off work. So I just really went all in, and I love it. And I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, I can see you kind of started off with like, hey, think I'm going to take on something here. Here's some tubes.
Yep.
And I mean, lucky or unluckily for you, the pandemic came and you had, your life must have been split into two things, just tubes and healthcare, right?
That's basically all I did. I either was at work, so stressed out, or I'd come home and be building tube amps. Kind of moving over to Aegis. I've been building amps in that thread for a while, the DIY thread, and people were really like, when are we going to be able to listen to some of this stuff? So I kind of had always had this idea in my mind. I was eventually going to do a DIY project or something. Since I have a demanding job, like starting an amp company and all that, like really just isn't going to work for my life, at least not right now. So I was like, well, I have this circuit that I think would either be a good DIY project or a good potential commercial design. So obviously it's become both, but that's sort of where Aegis originated. I had an idea for a circuit and released that as a DIY project first, and now we're coming around and finally getting it as a commercial product.
Yeah, I know one thing we talked about in the past was how, these one-off designs are different from what you would consider a commercial design. It sounds like there's some of the more esoteric and maybe expensive transformer matches. Is there anything like you can pinpoint between what makes a commercial design and what makes one more of a one-off?
Well, I think that for single-ended triode amplifiers in particular, a lot of commercial designs sort of use a very similar circuit. It's basically like a cathode bias or auto bias input stage and a cathode bias or auto bias output stage. It's sort of, and then within that, some transformers are changed, maybe some tubes are changed, but they're all kind of follow that kind of similar formula. So the pinpoint, I guess, is that with one-off or DIY designs, you can kind of dive into the weirder, more esoteric circuitry. But I've also tried to bring some of that into the Aegis circuit, and I think that's kind of what makes it interesting as a commercial amplifier.
Yeah, I know. I mean, one of the things I have already done with my DIY Aegis, which is the only DIY amp I've ever built, which you made extremely easy to build. So anyone watching this who, is interested at all in, building their own amp, I would highly recommend you check out the Aegis DIY thread. I was really intimidated going in, and it was much easier than I thought it was going to be. And not because it's an easy amp to build, but very much in credit to you, Keenan, and how well written those documentation is, and you really take it step by step. So just me pitching that to anyone. I'm not here to tell you have to buy the commercial version, but if you have some time, you know how to solder, making the DIY version of this, which you'll see in some of my other videos, I think is a really great idea, and something that, I feel really accomplished, even though I really didn't do that much. You did all the work. And I know you talked about it earlier, but like, what are a couple things in the Aegis and you said that, a lot of single-ended triode have the same design, same circuitry designs. What are the main couple differences in the circuitry design of this amp versus most of the headphone amps that you see out there?
So the biggest thing is that the output tube is wired as a cathode follower, which is different than how tubes are wired in a typical set amplifier. Cathode followers are actually much more commonly used in OTLs. Because they have low output impedance and low distortion. In an OTL, if you don't have a transformer, the tube has to have low output impedance so it can drive a headphone. So this kind of pairs that cathode follower, but it also transformer couples it.
So are you saying right there that like this amp kind of uses some OTL-like design in it, but as a transformer coupled amp?
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually sort of a marriage of those two things, because the tube is wired as it would be wired in an OTL, but rather than it being a cap coupled, it's transformer coupled. So it's a transformer coupled amplifier, but by using this cathode follower stage, you're able to remove a capacitor that's typically found in a single-ended triode amplifier that you would need. So essentially, you completely remove any signal capacitors out of the output stage. And, for me, when I design amplifiers, like the more caps you can remove from the signal path, it increases clarity, it increases soundstage realism. So that's like, to me, one of the biggest advantages of this circuit.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard it at Can Jam SoCal, and you sent it to me at the show. So the first time I heard it was sitting at the Can Jam table, like, the day or a few hours or whatever it was before the show. And I put on, whatever headphone I had, an Atrium or something. And I was just like, this sounds so big, but it still has a solid foundation. And it almost takes you aback a little bit when you hear an amp staging like that, because you're almost like, is this correct? Is it still, because it just sounds different. And I almost feel like that's the greatest strength of the Aegis, is that it does all this stuff really well without losing musicality, but it's not going to sound like any headphone amp that you have that you kind of get off the commercial market. I know you've mentioned to me the, getting the gain from the 6SL7s being cathode followed and everything. And I mean, that's one thing that I'm always like amazed with when I use the amp, is just how well, and that's one thing I found in all the amps I've used in the past, is a volume knob and where you can use it, and the usability of the volume knob. So you're not like ticking just down 9 o'clock and it's too loud, or you can't, have to go all the way up to get the right volume. How much of that tuning was done by the 6SL7 tube choice, and how much of it is it done by the, the transformers and whatnot?
So yeah, it's kind of you have to find a happy place with headphone amplifiers, because like I said, headphones are very sensitive. So you need to get like enough gain that there's like good play in the volume knob, but not so high gain that you're having issues with noise. And so the thing about a cathode follower is that it has no voltage gain. So all of the voltage gain is coming from the 6SL7s in this amplifier. Typically, if you pair something high gain like a 6SL7 with an output stage that also has voltage gain, like a typical set, you can have a really sensitive volume knob. You can have a high noise floor. But in this case, it works really well because, again, no voltage gain from the output stage. It's all from the input stage. So anytime you're designing a headphone amp, I find you have to find this sort of like happy place where there's enough gain, to get the headphones where you want them to be and you have good play, but not so high that you have noise problems. And by the time you even get to 9 o'clock, it's already like destroying your ears. So
what headphones do you use mostly these days? Do you have any non-ZMFs? What's on the?
Oh man, I maybe have like 1 or 2 non-ZMFs, but like right now I just have a fleet of ZMFs. I mean, I still love like the classic, like the HD 650, and I've got some like buyers and stuff, but I'm pretty much all in on ZMF. I've got probably the 2 I use most, or I'd say 3, are Caldera Open, Atrium Open, and Atrium Closed. I love those.
We gotta get you a Caldera Closed, I guess, because
and obviously I heard that in New York and it's awesome. But
what wood are we gonna? Did you tell me a wood? What wood are we gonna do?
Oh, I don't know. We got to talk about that, I guess.
And then I mean, my other question is just switching gears a little bit. So you did the whole DIY Aegis thing. You released it into the world. What has it been like supporting that?
It's been good. Overall, it's been good. Obviously, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. People have been extremely thankful. I think they recognize that I put a lot of time and effort into it. There was a lot of work and money spent doing it. But people have been really thankful, which I really appreciate. That's pretty much all you can ask for, is seeing people be happy with what they made and thank you for it. But overall, it's been good. And, other like people, but sort of in my mind, I was like, once this gets off the ground and a lot of people have built it, people will be able to help each other a little bit. And there's definitely been some of that too, where people have run into issues and then been able to help people coming after them troubleshoot those issues later.
What do you think of the DIY version to commercial version of how the aesthetic turned out? I mean, I know you didn't have quite as much a say in the aesthetic of the amp as you did in the sound.
I don't know. I mean, I really like it. I think it looks great. I like that it's like kind of got this deco look to it. I love the wooden faceplate. One like little detail that I don't know if people realize that I really like is the little ZMF logo inside of the VU meters.
Oh,
that's like a very like
get a shot of that. So I don't have them on, so I don't know.
Yeah, actually, it's probably easier to see with it off, but. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's such a cool little like touch, A
couple people have messaged and said, how big and heavy is this thing? And I'm like, it's like 60 pounds, So
yeah, it is a beast. And like, in my mind, it's like, that also speaks to the quality of an amplifier. Like tube amps that use a lot of iron are heavy. You know what I mean? It's if your tube amp is very light, then that means there's not very much inside of it.
Yes.
So it is heavy. So people need to be aware of that. It's the footprint isn't huge, but it is a chunker for sure.
I know kind of underground, Keenan, a lot of people love the Airmid. Do you want to tell us what the Airmid is and if we may ever see a commercial version of that, or what do you think?
For me, like the most, as far as I could go with the like typical cathode follower OTL circuit, it's sort of, like the bottlehead cracks of the world. The overall topology there is sort of similar amongst cathode follower OTLs that use like 6AS7. So I was like, what if I just like took that to the extreme and I used like, active loading of the output stage and voltage regulation and completely dual mono with like completely separate right, left power supplies and film output caps, the whole thing. So I just took it as far as I could. I just tried to make like the best possible version of that circuit. And, I only made like 6 of them. As far as like a commercial version of that, TBD, but like I think I could, maybe look at maybe some elements of that circuit. But that would definitely take some R&D.
I know there's also it's a 6AS7G and 6J5. Is that the two tubes?
Which are not like new production tubes. Those are like tubes that are not being made anymore. So that's
might need a little amendment there for.
Probably. Yeah. Probably have to switch those around to something else. But there are parts of that circuit that I think could work in a commercial design. It would just take some adaptation.
Back to Aegis talk. What is you've been running as your tube roll non, stock JJ tubes. What have you been putting in your Aegis lately at home?
I like for inputs, I like the RCA 5691, which are like a ruggedized 6SL7. They're kind of, they're up there as far as like the more sought after 6SL7s because they sound great. Outputs, I either like L0rdg EL37 or L0rdg EL34 XF2s, which are a classic. Both of those sound amazing. A lot of people who've done the DIY, you just love the EL37. It's just super spacious, very organic sounding. And then for rectifier, I like either a Philips GZ34 or I like the Brimar 5R4, which are both great.
Speaking of rectifiers, the commercial version can use a 5U4G. Now, what happened there? Is that just a trick that Keenan did when they were making it for us?
So, with the DIY version, I was working with sort of off the shelf transformers, right? So it's sort of like, I didn't have the ability to do custom stuff. So the filament winding for the rectifier and the DIY version was limited to 2 amps. So pretty much the rectifiers then are limited to 2 amp rectifiers, whereas a 5U4 and that whole family of rectifiers is 3 amps. So since we were able to do everything custom with the commercial version, we increased that winding current to 3 amps. So it can pretty much use almost any 5-volt rectifier up to 3 amps.
And then, one thing I've found, I don't know if there's a real technological explanation for this, but this amp will drive anything from sensitive IEM to the tungsten, the Mod House tungsten, which is the hardest headphone to drive in the market, even out passing the Svara right now. And I've noticed on some other amps that sometimes those hard to drive headphones will break up. Whereas on the Aegis, they just don't break up. The foundation stays solid. Is that just behind the kind of consistency of the current that's going into the headphones, or how does that work?
I don't have a good technical explanation for it yet. I know that people have said the tungsten, it needs XYZ voltage output. Off the top of my head, I think the voltage output, for Aegis maybe goes to like 20 volts. But I don't know. It seems to drive like high impedance planars really well. I know a lot of other people have told me that. I don't quite have a great explanation for that, but it doesn't have the same super low output impedance that like a typical solid state amplifier is. So maybe those planars perform a little bit better with a slightly higher output impedance from a tube amp.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other kind of feature of the amp is that the XLR and quarter inch have slightly different output impedances with a different low, medium, high. And I think if I'm correct, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the XLR has a higher output impedance than the quarter inch.
It does. And that's so there's something interesting going on there is that the XLR is actually a balanced output. I would call it kind of a pseudo balance because basically the output transformer is acting like a phase splitter and then the signal is being recombined at the headphone driver. The consequence of that is that the output impedance is higher. However, the power output is also slightly higher. Interestingly, though, I do think there is a little bit of a sound difference, at least to my ears, between the two of them. So I think it gives people a little bit of, something else to play with in terms of their sound preference.
Well, I think that covers. Is there anything about the Aegis you think that we've missed here that then you want to point out?
The only other thing I'd say is that people probably maybe want to know is between the DIY and the ZMF version is in the commercial version, there is a transistor filter in the power supply that reduces ripple somewhat. It's not in the signal path or anything. It's not like it's like a hybrid circuit or something like that, but it does add some additional ripple filtering that it kind of allows the choke filter in the power supply to be a little less bulky. It's called a capacitor multiplier. It's like an excellent circuit. I use it in other designs all the time, but I just wanted people to know that so they don't like, what's this transistor in my tube amp? Like it's not in the signal path. You can't hear it. It's just decreases the noise floor.
Yeah. Keenan, just, anything else you want to cover before I let you go?
Oh, I think we got it all. I'm just happy that we were able to get this out to people and just excited to see what people think.
And you're coming to Can Jam SoCal, right?
I'm coming to Can Jam SoCal. I'll be there.
All right, we'll get you a special Can Jam SoCal outfit so people know who Keenan is the moment they come in the ZMF room. We plan on, I plan on working with Keenan as long as I can on the amp stuff. I just, I love tube amps, and I love Keenan's tube amps the most of any tube amps I've ever had. And any chance, especially if you're in the Chicago area, when we're doing our new workshop and have some of those demo days, anyone come by and hear the Airmid, the Air Mountain, the Air Universe, the 3 other amps I have from Keenan that exist in the ZMF shop. It's always a great day when I get to power those on. So thank you for those, Keenan. And we'll check you next time. And anyone on the ZMF channel, look for Keenan on a live stream at some point. And May 10th will be the release of the Aegis amplifier.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Peace. See you guys.